I was 19 when I became homeless. I had just left a situation that wasn't safe, and though I didn't have a plan, staying was no longer an option. I had a bag of clothes, a few bucks, and no one to call. I ended up in one of those neighborhoods where it feels like the buildings themselves are watching you, where everyone's either up to something or pretending they're not. I found a semi-abandoned house, a couple streets off the main road. It didn't have power or water, but the back door didn't lock, and the neighbors seemed to mind their business. I would sleep there at night, tucked behind a broken refrigerator someone had dragged inside, and during the day, I'd wander. Fast food restaurants were a godsend. You could sit there for a while if you looked tired enough, but not too suspicious. Gas stations were better if you needed a place to lay low without being noticed. But the streets were always dangerous, and not in the way most people imagine. The real threat wasn't random violence or fights breaking out. It was the slow, constant pressure of being seen as prey. It started small. A guy leaning out of his truck window as I passed by, asking if I needed a ride. I'd say no, try to keep walking, but they wouldn't let it go. "You sure? It's hot out. You can sit on my lap." Another one offered me food, but the way he said it made it clear it came with a price. "You hungry? Come eat something real." I learned early on to keep my responses short. No eye contact, no attitude, just walk, but that only worked some of the time. There was a gas station on the corner of Redwood and King. I used to sit on the curb there when I was too tired to walk anymore. One afternoon, I noticed a lifted grey pickup truck pull into the lot. The driver was a tall guy, bald, heavy-set, probably in his late 30s. He wore a tank top and had a silver chain around his neck. I felt his eyes on me before he said anything. "You lost, girl?" I said nothing, just stood up and started walking toward the sidewalk. "Come here, I'll give you $15 if you suck me off, real quick." I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking. That was mistake number one. He pulled out of the lot and cut me off at the next corner, parked sideways, got out of his truck and leaned on the hood like he was waiting. "You deaf or something?" I said I got $15 for you. Easy money. There was no one else around. The gas station clerk had gone inside. The street was empty. For a moment, I wondered if I should just turn and walk the other way. But when I glanced behind me, I saw a second truck slowing down. This one had two guys inside. They didn't say anything, just stared at me through the windshield. I remember feeling trapped in that moment. Not physically. I could run, I could scream, but neither would guarantee anything. And when you're a girl, especially one who looks tired and dirty and alone, you start to realize how invisible you really are, or worse, how visible you are to the wrong people. I turned to the first guy and said, "Leave me alone." He laughed like I had just told a joke. "You think you're too good? You out here with no shoes on, and you think you are better than me?" I kept walking. He got in his truck and drove ahead again. Did it 2 more times, each time blocking the sidewalk like he was corralling me. I remember something snapping in my chest, this tight, boiling feeling that turned into cold rage. I wasn't thinking, I was just reacting. When he stopped again and opened his door to step out, I ran straight up to the side of the truck and kicked his side mirror as hard as I could. It snapped clean off and hit the ground with a loud crack. I didn't wait to see his face. I just ran. I ran for what felt like forever. Through alleys, across yards, through traffic. My chest was burning. But I didn't stop until I was sure he hadn't followed me. After that, things got worse. I started staying awake at night and sleeping during the day. It was safer that way. But even then, I had close calls. One night, I was sitting behind a grocery store loading dock, trying to eat a sandwich someone had tossed in the trash still wrapped. A white SUV pulled up without headlights. The window rolled down. "You need a place to sleep?" I said no. "I got a bed, air conditioning. You can shower. Maybe earn a little extra while you're at it." I didn't respond. He waited for a minute. Then he drove away. 20 minutes later, a different car pulled up. Same offer, different man. That kind of thing happened too often to be a coincidence. Some of the worst moments didn't even come from words. It was the looks, the slow drive-bys, the guys who would park and just sit there, watching. No expression, no shame. Just sitting with the engine running and the window cracked like they were waiting for something to happen. I carried a brick in my bag for a while, eventually swapped it for a knife I found in a dumpster. I never had to use it, but having it made me feel like I might at least have a chance if something happened. The scariest moment came late one night. I had found a new hiding spot, an old storage shed behind a tire shop. The lock had been broken and it was dry inside, full of old tires and grease-stained rags. I curled up behind some boxes and drifted off. I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming. Then footsteps. Then silence. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The door creaked open. Someone stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping the room. It landed on my foot. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just froze. The light hovered for a second, then clicked off. Whoever it was stood there in the dark for a moment. Then they left. The door shut. The car drove off. I didn't sleep again for 3 days. Eventually, I got out of that life. A shelter opened up a few neighborhoods away, and I was able to get a bed. They had rules, and it wasn't perfect, but it was something. From there, I got connected to a local outreach program that helped me find temporary housing, then a part-time job. I do not share this for pity. I share it because people think they understand what it's like to be vulnerable, but most of them don't. Most of them don't know what it's like to be seen as nothing but an object to be bought, used, or discarded. When I was around 12 or 13, home stopped feeling like a home. I had one parent still in the picture, but they had started using meth, and with that came a steady stream of strange people coming and going at all hours. The front door might be locked sometimes, but that didn't matter. People came in through windows, knocked with weird codes, or just sat out front in beat-up cars waiting for who knows what. It got to the point where I was more afraid inside my house than I was outside, and that's not how it should be when you're a kid. We had this old tree fort in the woods behind our property. It was something my siblings and I had built years before, when life still felt kind of normal. It was halfway up a slope, about a 15-minute walk from the road, tucked into a patch of woods thick enough to hide it during the day. The fort had always felt like an adventure spot before, the kind of place you imagine turning into a pirate ship or secret base. I never thought it would become my safe place, my only place. The first night I slept there, I remember how quiet it was. It was early fall. I had my jacket, a flashlight, and one of those dollar store survival blankets that crinkled like tinfoil every time I moved. I wedged myself into the corner where the wooden railing met the wall and stared out through a slit in the boards. I didn't sleep much that night or the next, but I felt safer than I had in a long time. That became my routine. I would hang out at school as long as possible, then make my way up the hill behind our house and crawl into the tree fort. I had to be careful not to bring attention to myself. I couldn't let the wrong people know I was up there. If my parents noticed I was gone, they didn't say anything, and the people they brought around, they were the reason I was out there to begin with. The woods weren't always peaceful though. Most nights were fine, but one night, something happened that I've never really talked about to anyone. It was a cold night, probably somewhere in late October. The moon was bright enough to light up the ground through the branches. I had just drifted off, wrapped in my coat, when I heard the soft crunching of leaves. At first I figured it was just a raccoon or something. Animals passed through here all the time. But then it stopped. I opened my eyes and peered through the gap in the fort wall, and my stomach dropped. There was a man standing down below, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the base of the tree. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, looking up, staring directly at the fort. At me. I froze. For a moment I thought maybe he couldn't see me. Maybe he was just looking at the structure itself. But as I stayed still, he didn't look away. He kept staring. He took one slow step forward. I felt my heart beating in my throat. I didn't know what to do. If I made a noise, I might draw his attention, but if I stayed quiet, he might climb up. Then I remembered something from a movie I had seen. The character had scared off someone by pretending they weren't alone. So I rolled slowly onto my back and yelled out as clearly as I could without panicking, "Dad, wake up! Someone's coming up." The second I said that, the man turned and bolted. No hesitation. He just turned and ran into the woods, branches snapping as he disappeared into the trees. I stayed frozen for another hour. Eventually, I drifted into a half sleep, but I didn't sleep well after that. I didn't want to risk another visit, and I definitely didn't feel safe in the fort anymore. The next day, I didn't go back there. Instead, I confided in a friend from school. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough. I told him I didn't feel safe at home and that I had been crashing in the woods. I think he knew things were bad, even if he didn't say it out loud. His house had this attic loft with a pull-down ladder and a space just big enough for a small mattress. He talked to his parents, or maybe he didn't, but either way, he let me stay there sometimes. Not every night, but when it was cold, or when I looked like I hadn't slept, he'd say, "Come on," and sneak me in. That space, that warm attic, was probably the closest thing I had to comfort during those years. It was quiet. The air always smelled like dust and old insulation, but it felt safe. He never made a big deal out of it. He never asked for anything. That kind of quiet kindness stays with you. When I look back now, I realize just how young I was. Just a kid trying to figure out where to sleep, trying to stay invisible. I never told anyone in person about that night in the tree fort. Not until now. I spent the years between 2007 and 2012 homeless. That was most of my teenage life. I wasn't alone either. My father was with me the entire time. He was homeless too. This happened in Portland, Maine. I was 16 at the time. My father and I had been drifting for months. That night, we arrived at one of the more crowded homeless shelters in the city. We had been there before, but this time was different. They were over capacity. They had a spot for my dad, just a little piece of floor. He took it without complaining, but they didn't have one for me. There were no extra cots or even floor space left. One of the workers quietly suggested I try across the street. There was a Catholic church on the corner with a small garden area beside it. It wasn't much, just a few patches of grass, some benches, and a handful of trees. But the priests there were known to turn a blind eye to people sleeping there on crowded nights. They never kicked anyone out. In fact, it had become a sort of unofficial overflow shelter for people like me. So I crossed the street alone, carrying the small duffel bag that held everything I owned. It was late, past midnight, cold but not freezing. I found a small patch of grass near a bush and unrolled the old blanket I had. A couple was already lying a few feet away, huddled together under a worn-out sleeping bag. I didn't want to intrude, so I laid down quietly and turned my back to them. But I couldn't sleep. Not because of the cold, not even because of the discomfort. I couldn't sleep because of what I heard. The couple had started whispering. At first I couldn't make out what they were saying. I assumed they were just talking to each other, trying to pass the time. But after a minute or two, I realized they were talking about me. They were discussing whether they should rob me. The woman kept asking if I looked like I had anything valuable. The man said he saw me pull something shiny out of my bag earlier, probably a phone or a knife. That wasn't true. I had a cheap folding knife, but I hadn't taken anything out near them. They must have been guessing or lying to each other to justify what they were thinking of doing. They talked about it for over 20 minutes. I stayed perfectly still the entire time, pretending to sleep, but my fingers were wrapped tight around the handle of my knife inside my bag. My heart was racing so hard, I thought they might hear it. They never got up. Eventually, they fell asleep or gave up. I didn't move an inch. I laid there with my eyes half open until the sun came up. That was the scariest kind of night, not the ones with storms or freezing air, not even the nights when you went hungry. It was the nights where you were completely alone, exposed, and aware that someone else nearby was thinking of hurting you. I had a lot of them. Sometimes we would sleep under bridges or inside empty ice shacks near the docks, sometimes in stairwells. When we were lucky, we'd find a church porch or an abandoned building. But the nights spent outside always had that same tense energy. You could never fully relax. Even when things were quiet, your mind was constantly scanning for threats. My father did his best. He was in his 50s by then and had been a working man his whole life. He had some issues, sure, but he never let me feel like I was doing this alone. He shared what little food he had. He gave me his jacket when it got too cold. He even managed to make me laugh sometimes when the situation was too bleak. We stayed close, rarely splitting up. Eventually, in 2010, something changed. I don't remember the exact sequence of events that led to it, but my dad managed to land some kind of temporary work. I think it was through a temp agency, manual labor. He would get picked up in the mornings, work all day, and come back with just enough money to survive the next 24 hours. After a few weeks of that, he came to me one night and said he had found a place. Not a shelter. A real place. He told me it was a small studio apartment, just a single room with a bathroom and a kitchenette, 400 square feet, nothing special. But it had heat, a door that locked, a roof that didn't leak. We went to see it together. I remember the exact feeling when we stepped inside. The air was warm and dry, the kind of warmth you forget exists when you're living outside. The walls were bare. There was a single window, a tiny stove, a bed that sagged in the middle. But it was ours. I turned to my dad and asked him a question without thinking. "This is all ours?" He looked at me and just nodded. He didn't say anything. We didn't have furniture or clothes or even bed sheets, but we had privacy, we had safety. That little apartment felt like a palace. For a few months, we lived like kings. But I never forgot that night in the church garden, or the feeling of fear in the air when someone whispered about hurting me for the few belongings I had. I never forgot sleeping under bridges or eating dry oatmeal straight from the packet because I had nothing else. And I never forgot walking into that tiny studio and asking if it was really ours. It taught me to appreciate warmth, doors, silence, a roof, a safe place to fall asleep without a knife in your hand. Most people don't know what it's like, but I do. When I moved out at 15, I didn't have much of a plan. Just a backpack and a vague idea that Muskegon, Michigan might have more opportunities than the town I left behind. I had no car, barely any money, and no real support system. But I was trying to better myself. The problem was, Muskegon at night is something else entirely. If you've ever walked those streets after dark, especially as a kid, you'll know exactly what I mean. For almost a year, I didn't have a home. I bounced from couch to couch, slept on porches, in parks, or anywhere that didn't kick me out. Sometimes I stayed in abandoned buildings. Once, I even slept in the back of a storage unit someone left unlocked. But the scariest part wasn't the lack of shelter, it was the moment the sun started going down each day. Because that's when I knew I had to disappear. I would spend my daylight hours trying to stay clean, find food, or hustle any little job someone would offer. But at night, things shifted, people changed, the streets got meaner. And when you're young, alone, and have nothing on you but a string backpack and the clothes on your back, you become a target. It happened more than once. Someone would come out of nowhere and put a knife to my side or flash a gun and demand everything I had. They didn't believe me when I said I didn't have anything. Or maybe they just didn't care. One guy didn't even rob me. He just beat the hell out of me because he could. He punched me until I was on the ground, then slashed my arm open with a box cutter. I bled through my shirt walking back to a broken down shelter behind a laundromat where I hid that night. I still have the scar. There were people who tried to help. That's what kept me going. I'll never forget the security guard at the old Kmart near downtown Muskegon. I'd sneak into the store sometimes to get warm or dry off when it rained. The employees never noticed, but the guard did. He saw me. He never said anything directly, just gave me a look sometimes, maybe held the door open a little longer than he needed to. I think he knew. I started hanging around the hygiene aisle, brushing my teeth with a store display brush, swiping deodorant off the shelf just to feel halfway human. I thought I was being slick. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe someone saw me and decided not to say anything. One day, a stranger, and I still don't know who it was, walked up behind me near the pharmacy, handed me a small plastic bag, and walked away. Inside was a cheap but new travel kit. Toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, a few protein bars, and a fresh pair of socks. There was no note, no explanation, just a moment of pure kindness from someone I'll never be able to thank. After that, I got myself together a bit more. A friend gave me a bag, one of those drawstring backpacks, and I started carrying what I called my essentials. Inside, I had my hygiene supplies, a folding knife, my wallet, and my most recent school ID. That bag never left my body. Even when I slept, it was either under my head or wrapped around my arm. It wasn't about the value, it was all I had. Drugs were everywhere, and honestly, I slipped a few times. When you're hungry, cold, and exhausted, anything that takes the edge off starts to look like salvation. But that's how they get to you. A guy gave me something once. Just a hit, he said. Said it would calm my nerves. For a while, it did. But then, he started following me. I caught him watching me through a bus stop window one night. Another time, he showed up at the church shelter where I was hoping to get a bed and stood across the street for 2 hours, just staring. I never accepted anything from him again, but I still don't know what he wanted. That part sticks with me. There was another night I didn't talk about much. I had just left a gas station where I tried to warm up in the restroom for a few minutes. It was raining, and I didn't have anywhere to go. I thought maybe I'd try the side door of an old auto shop I had crashed in before, but when I got there, it was boarded up. So I went to this little park near Laketon Avenue. The place was empty except for a bench under a small pavilion. I laid down, tried to ignore the cold seeping through the wood, and drifted off for a bit. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not fast, not heavy, just slow and deliberate. I stayed still, barely breathing. My fingers found the knife in my bag, but I didn't pull it out. I waited. Then I heard a voice. It was quiet, almost a whisper. "Are you out here alone?" I didn't answer. The footsteps got closer. I could hear the water in their shoes, the plastic sound of a rain poncho crinkling. Then the steps stopped, just feet from my bench. "You got anything worth trading?" the voice asked again. Still, I said nothing. I could feel them looking at me, just standing there, watching. After what felt like forever, they walked away. I didn't move for another hour. I don't know what they wanted, maybe nothing. But that moment reminded me how invisible I was to most people and how vulnerable I was to the rest. Eventually, things started to shift. I got a temporary job, unloading boxes at a warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing official, paid in cash, but it was something. One of the guys there noticed I didn't have a consistent place to sleep and offered his couch for a couple nights. He didn't make it weird, didn't ask questions, just said, "You need it more than I do." That couch saved my life. It gave me a place to shower, a place to rest. It gave me time to get clean, time to eat properly, time to figure out my next move. And somehow, I made it. Now, I'm 21. I live in my own apartment. It's small, but it's mine. I have food in the fridge, a car, 2 jobs, a 401 Kelvin. I even pay rent on time. And sometimes when I'm lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I remember those nights in Muskegon, the people, the cold, the fear. But I also remember the kindness, the guard who looked the other way, the stranger who gave me hygiene supplies, the friend who gave me a bag, the co-worker who gave me a couch. And those are the things that kept me alive. This started when I was about 20. I had lost my job, burned through what little savings I had, and eventually found myself sleeping in a city-run shelter. It was not the worst place. They gave you a mat, a thin blanket, and a place to stay from sundown to sunrise. But at 7 in the morning, they made you leave. No exceptions. And when you had nowhere else to go, those daylight hours could feel like years. I was not gay, and I am still not. But when you are hungry and tired and cold, and someone waves $100 bill in your face, it is amazing how quickly your values begin to bend. I never thought I would sell myself for money, but the truth is, it gave me a way out. Eventually, I was lucky in one respect. I had long hair back then and soft features. When I cleaned up, I could pass for younger or just vaguely feminine, and it made me appealing to a certain type of client, older men. Lonely men, the kind who hung around convenience stores or dingy strip mall slot machine rooms. I learned where to be, where to stand, what to wear without saying too much. Most of them were harmless. Sad, really. They just wanted someone to talk to or be with them for a few minutes. They would hand me some cash, do what they came for, and disappear. I never got attached, never gave real names, never got into cars if I did not have to. But there was one guy. I still remember his face. Everything about him gave me a bad feeling, but I ignored it because he offered $1,000. It was late. Around 11, I was leaning against the back wall of a gas station near one of the game rooms. He pulled up in a black SUV, clean, well kept, and rolled his window down. He looked to be in his mid to late 40s. He wore a collared shirt and jeans, had thick glasses, and a carefully trimmed beard. He did not look like the others. He was quiet, calm. He did not leer or ask anything dirty. He just asked if I wanted to spend the night and the next day at his place. 1,000, cash. At that time, that kind of money felt like a miracle. A way out, rent for a room, a phone, a step toward something normal. I hesitated, but nodded. He unlocked the door and I got in. His house was about 15 minutes away. Not run down, not a mansion, just a regular suburban place with a clean yard and a driveway full of old leaves. He did not say much during the ride, just turned the radio on low and drove like this was something he had done before. When we got to the house, everything seemed normal at first. The living room was clean, the kitchen had wine bottles lined up on a shelf. He offered me water. I accepted. We sat for a few minutes while he asked basic questions. Where I was from, how long I had been around. I lied, of course, made up a name, told him I was 19 and just needed the money. Then he said, I want to show you something. I followed him out to the garage. He unlocked the door with a key he wore around his neck. The moment he opened it, I felt the air shift. It was cold, dark, and there was a smell, not foul exactly, like rubber and sweat. Inside was what I can only describe as a dungeon. The walls were covered in black foam padding, the kind with sharp ridges like egg cartons. There were hooks, chains, leather cuffs, strange devices I did not recognize. A black recliner sat in the middle of the room beneath a single red bulb. He looked at me and smiled. Not in a creepy way, more like he was proud of the room, like someone showing off a new stereo system. This is where I like to play, he said. I tried to stay calm. I tried to act unbothered, but every part of my body was telling me to leave. I changed my mind, I told him. He blinked. What? I changed my mind. I am not comfortable. I want to go. His face shifted, not angry, just blank, like a screen going dark. You agreed. I do not care. I want to leave. He stepped in front of the door. You are not leaving. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go, just padded walls and the chair and all that strange equipment. We had a deal, he said. You are here now. I do not know what it was exactly that made him snap. Maybe he thought he could intimidate me. Maybe he was used to getting what he wanted. But he raised his hand and punched me, hard, right in the collarbone. I remember the sound more than the pain. A dull thud, like something hollow being hit. It did not even hurt that much. I think the adrenaline had already kicked in. That and the training from when I was younger. I had done Kyokushin karate for years growing up. My dad forced me into it. I used to hate those long sessions, the bruises, the yelling. But in that moment, it saved my life. As soon as he hit me, I snapped into motion. I threw a front kick straight into his balls. He doubled over, and I followed it with a knee strike to the side of his head. He went down hard. I did not wait to see if he got up. I ran. Through the garage, through the living room. I barely remembered to grab my bag from the couch. I burst out the front door and ran until I could not breathe. Every block I crossed, I ducked behind fences, dumpsters, anything. I kept thinking he would come after me, that he would call the cops and lie, that he would track me down and finish what he started. But he never did. I never saw him again. After that night, I started saving every dollar I made. I got lucky with a client who paid me in advance for a full week, and I used that money to get a cheap studio apartment. It had cracked tiles and mold in the corner, but it had a lock on the door and a light switch. For the first time in months, I felt human again. Eventually, I applied for a warehouse job. Nothing fancy, but it paid, and I stuck with it. That led to another job, then another. Now I work in logistics for a regional supply chain. I have a steady paycheck, a fridge full of food, a bed I do not have to fight for. Sometimes I think about how close I came to disappearing, how easy it would have been, and how no one would have noticed. When I was 17, I was homeless. That is not an easy sentence to say out loud, even now. There is something about saying it that makes it feel more real, and honestly, I spent most of that year trying to pretend it was not. I told myself it was temporary, just a phase, just a streak of bad luck. But the truth is, when you are sleeping outside in the middle of a Canadian winter, luck is not really on your side. There was a park near the edge of the city. Not huge, but enough trees and walking paths to make it feel like a safe place to disappear. In the center of the park was a wooden gazebo, the kind that looked like it used to be part of some community event space. On one side of the floor, hidden behind a wooden panel, was a trapdoor. I discovered it one day while trying to stay out of the wind. Under that trapdoor was a small room filled with folding chairs. I guessed it was used for storage, or maybe for seating, when performances used to happen in the park. Either way, nobody used it anymore. That is where I slept most nights. I would crawl down through the trapdoor after sunset, pull it closed above me, and curl up under the chairs. It was dark and damp and smelled like mold, but it was warmer than the wind. Every night, I feared someone would find me and lock the trapdoor while I was inside. I used to dream about that, waking up to pitch black and no way out. I would wake up gasping, convinced it had happened, even though it never did. Eventually, I met some people by chance. A few guys who had been friends with my older brothers years before. They recognized me and asked what I was doing out there. I told them part of the truth. They offered me a room in the house they were staying in. I accepted. At the time, it felt like a miracle. A roof, heat, a bed. But like a lot of stories that start that way, it did not end well. They were drug dealers, nothing big, just local traffic, but the kind of people who carried knives and had more enemies than friends. The kind of people who were always one wrong word away from flipping on you. I kept my head down and stayed quiet. I never told my family where I was or what I was doing. They lived in a different city anyway. Around Christmas, my dad drove out to pick me up and bring me to my parents' new place. They had moved after going bankrupt, and it was the first time I had seen them in a while. The visit was calm, nothing dramatic, just a regular Christmas, and at the end of it, they offered to let me move back in. I told them I would think about it. When I got back to the house I had been staying at, there was someone doing cocaine in my bedroom, not on a table, on my mattress. I sat down in the hallway and stared at the floor for a long time. The next morning, I called my dad and said I had changed my mind. When I moved back home, I was 5'11" and weighed about 120 pounds. I had been surviving off quarters. I would ask people if they could spare a coin so I could make a phone call, then take the change and use it to buy instant noodles. At school, there was a breakfast program that gave out 1 oatmeal packet per student every morning. I took full advantage of that. It was not much, but it helped. Most people do not get as lucky as I did. I mean that sincerely. I know how quickly things can spiral. You do not really understand how cold a Canadian winter can get until you have spent it curled up under a park bench or inside an abandoned ice fishing shack. One night, I crawled inside a doghouse behind someone's home. The family did not have a dog anymore. The doghouse had a door I could wedge closed and it was insulated. I curled up inside my coat and fit my entire body into that tiny space. It was the warmest sleep I had in weeks. Things had not always been like this. My parents went bankrupt and lost everything. My older brother and sister already had their own places. I stayed behind with my sister after my parents left town. That lasted until she kicked me out for not finishing the dishes before she got home from work. My brother let me stay at his place once, just one night. After that, I bounced from couch to couch. Friends of friends, people who barely knew me. You burn your welcome quickly when you are not paying rent. I do not blame them. Eventually, I reached out to my parents again, but it was clear they had little interest in helping. I am still not sure what I did to make them feel that way. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just too much for them to handle. My father had served in the military, a veteran. He had been injured during a peacekeeping mission in Yugoslavia. The injury got worse over time, and eventually he was removed from active duty and placed at a desk for the rest of his career. Then he was medically discharged. Afterward, he took a manager position at a retail store. It did not pay well, but it was something. A few years later, a friend convinced him to leave that job and work at a bank branch that was located inside the store. He was told the commission bonuses would be worth it. 3 months later, the bank closed all the in-store locations, just shut them down. And with it, my father's only source of income. They went bankrupt soon after. My mother was already disabled. She had 2 strokes within weeks of giving birth to me. I never knew her before the wheelchair. When they moved back to their hometown, her condition had worsened. Doctors called it fibromyalgia, though I always suspected that was just a general name they gave to someone with pain everywhere. She was always hurting, always tired. I think part of the reason I did not push to go back was because I knew I would only be another weight for them to carry. They had been through enough. When I did move back in, things were not perfect, but they were better than the streets. I started eating again. I got my strength back. Slowly, I spent a lot of time in silence. I did not know how to talk about what I had been through. Still do not. I made it out, barely, and I never forget how lucky that makes me.